many other...
Hello and welcome to WION Live broadcast from London. I'm Laura Makin-Isherwood and here are the top headlines for this hour. The leaders of France, Germany, Italy and Romania arrive in Kyiv in a show of collective European support for the Ukrainian people as they continue attempts to resist Russia's invasion. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson publishes the resignation letter of his ethics advisor, Lord Gauke, who quit after questioning the PM for breaking rules over Partygate. Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey is given unconditional bail after appearing at a London court charged with sex offences against 3 men. McDonald's will pay $1.3 billion in France to avoid a legal case over tax evasion between 2009 and 2020 under an agreement approved by a Paris court. Emergency services battle several wildfires in Spain as the country remains in the grip of a heat wave that has seen temperatures reach 43 degrees Celsius. The troubles continue for UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. His ethics advisor, Lord Gauke, has quit. The resignation came a day after Lord Gauke said that there was a legitimate question about whether the Prime Minister broke ministerial rules over Partygate. Now, the details on the reasons behind Lord Gauke's resignation have been exposed. The UK government published the letter in full after pressure from MPs. The ethics advisor's decision appears to have caught Number 10 by surprise. A government spokesperson said earlier this week that Lord Gauke was asked to, quote, provide advice on a commercially sensitive matter in the national interest, which had previously had cross-party support, unquote. Number 10 did not clarify what the matter was, and the decision is still pending relating to it. Lord Gauke is Johnson's second advisor to quit in less than 2 years. His predecessor, Alex Allen, quit in November 2020 after the Prime Minister ignored his findings in a report that investigated whether the UK Home Secretary, Priti Patel, had bullied civil servants. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by our London correspondent, Julia Chapman. Julia, yesterday we got a one-line statement from the government on their website announcing Lord Gauke's resignation, but Boris Johnson had been under pressure to reveal more about the reasons behind it. Now that letter has been published in full. What's in it?
Well, we are hearing from Prime Minister Boris Johnson today saying in this letter to Lord Gauke in response to his resignation that the Prime Minister was surprised by his announcement, having discussed earlier this week that he was happy to continue in the role at least until the end of the year. But I think most people will be more surprised not by the resignation itself, but the reasons for the resignation, because although Lord Gauke said in his letter to the Prime Minister that he did have some frustration over Boris Johnson's handling of the Partygate scandal, in which the Prime Minister received fines for breaking lockdown rules during the coronavirus pandemic here in the UK, the reason that he said ultimately pushed him over the edge to make this decision to resign was regarding a new matter that arose this week. Lord Gauke said in his letter that he had been asked to consult on a measure which he believed would risk a deliberate breach of the ministerial code. Now, that has been rejected by Boris Johnson, who in his response said he didn't believe that was the case. In fact, he was asking Lord Gauke to consult on this matter in order to ensure that the ministerial code had been upheld. He also said that what was at risk was possibly a breach of the UK's requirements under the World Trade Organization, and that is why Lord Gauke was being asked to consult on this. The details are still far from clear, but of course this does put more pressure on Boris Johnson. As you said, this is the second such resignation of an ethics advisor to the Prime Minister in less than 2 years. It's going to be very likely to be more difficult to replace him this time around. And of course, Prime Minister Boris Johnson only recently survived a vote of no confidence. This alone is unlikely to create any kind of huge political earthquake, but the statement from Lord Gauke was certainly a very stark one. And Boris Johnson certainly does have more questions to answer over the reason for this resignation.
Yeah, and Julia, as you've just said, it's been a pretty tricky few weeks for the Prime Minister after that no confidence vote, of course. Do we expect much more from him later today?
Well, certainly we are expecting more details on the reason for this resignation. We understand it has something to do with subsidies for a certain British industry, but the details are still far from clear. So we are hoping that later in the day there will be a broader response from the government with regards to why Lord Gauke has resigned, the matter with which he said that he was going to do so, and the reasons for that resignation. But certainly there are still many unanswered questions when it comes to the matter that he said put him in what he called an impossible and odious position this week.
Thanks very much, Julia. We'll stay with this because we're still talking about the UK now. And now we move on to a recent report that's indicated that groceries in the United Kingdom are going to become costlier this summer. Analysts at the Institute of Grocery Distribution said that the prices will rise 15%, so UK households will have to shell out more money for buying their bread, meat and dairy. It also warned that many vulnerable people could be forced to skip meals in the coming weeks as they try to tackle that soaring cost. In its report, the IGD said that the UK is facing the highest cost of living crisis since the 1970s, and the reason behind it is the war in Ukraine. The Russian invasion has triggered a grain shortage in most of the world, and countries are scrambling to get their hands on produce, pushing up market prices. The IGD said that products that depend on grains, whether that's directly or indirectly, will see a price hike this summer. Alongside that is the rise in global crude oil prices, of course, which is pushing those food rates up, and fuel costs as well. The UK imports 40% of its food requirement, making it vulnerable to global food price fluctuations. And inflation levels in the UK are also at 9% now. But the Bank of England says it expects those levels to fall back through 2023. Well, Julia Chapman is still with us from London. Julia, the cost of living crisis appears to be strengthening its grip on the UK. The UK government has started putting policies in place to try to support those households that are on the lowest incomes. Just take us through a few of those. What are they, and will they be enough?
Yes, certainly more pressure building on British households. The government says it is taking steps to help mitigate some of the effects, many of them global pressures, including, of course, the war in Ukraine, the shutdown of production in many parts of China, putting more and more pressure on prices here in the UK, which are going up and are predicted to continue to do so over the course of the year. What the British government has announced is that there will be a one-off payment for roughly the poorest 8 million households in the UK. This is at a cost of 15 billion British pounds. They are going to offer this support payment to those on means-tested benefits, so those that are already receiving some sort of support package from the government on a regular basis because of need. So this is certainly expected to help in some way mitigate the effects of rising inflation, but it is only a one-off payment. The other thing that the government is doing is offering an energy rebate. That was already announced earlier this year at being £200 per household. They've doubled that to £400 per household now. So these steps are being taken in an effort to make things a little bit easier for the UK residents that are going to the shops and finding that food prices are continuing to rise. As this report says, they could rise by 15% later in the summer. Food inflation at the moment, year on year, is at 7.8%, but very likely to continue rising. And in other news today, we've also had the announcement from the Bank of England, Britain's central bank, which has increased interest rates in an effort to get inflation under control. So another measure being taken to make things a little bit easier, but that could certainly take some time to feed through.
Julia Chapman in London, thank you. The leaders of France, Germany and Italy arrived in Kyiv today for their first visit to Ukraine since the Russian invasion began late in February. The trio were seen sitting together in a carriage on board a night train from Poland. The visit is aimed at portraying a message of European unity towards the country. The leaders will later meet Ukraine's embattled President Volodymyr Zelensky. French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, along with the Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, visited the city of Irpin earlier today. On the visit, Macron praised the heroism of the war-devastated city and its people.
It's very important. You know that the war has started.
We have all seen these images of a devastated city, which is at the same time a heroic city because it is here. Among other things, that the Ukrainians stopped the Russian army that was descending on Kyiv. So we have to imagine the heroism of the army, but also of the Ukrainian population.
Kyiv has criticised France, Germany and, to a lesser extent, Italy for allegedly dragging their feet in support of Ukraine. On Wednesday, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the EU's procrastination on sending weapons is not justified. The visit also comes as Kyiv is pushing for membership to the European bloc. Earlier on his visit to Romania, Macron voiced a tougher line on Russia. He said that Europe needed to send a strong signal to Ukraine, adding that Kyiv would eventually have to negotiate with Moscow. Our correspondent Trent Murray sent us this report from Berlin.
I think that'll be the big question that the Ukrainians will have as well. What message will these leaders bring with them? Will it be just some warm words of support, or will there be more pledges for things like heavy weapons? That is certainly what Kyiv says they need to help repel this Russian invasion. But it is a very symbolic visit, as you mentioned. The leaders of the three big European Union countries all joining together on that night train from Poland, effectively parking the VIP jets at the border and then taking the train, because obviously the airspace is still not safe given that ongoing war and given the repeated Russian rockets that continue to fire into Ukraine, including the west of Ukraine. So the three of them arriving in Kyiv about 2 hours ago exactly. They were welcomed by some air raid sirens as they arrived, a stark reminder of just how dangerous the situation is. We don't know much about their schedule yet. All three of the capitals are remaining a little bit tight-lipped about exactly what they will be doing there. But as you say, it won't be just Ukraine watching what happens. It will be the entire world, because Ukraine says it needs a lot more European support to defend itself against Russia.
Well, on Wednesday, US President Joe Biden announced another $1 billion aid package will be offered to Ukraine after a conversation with President Zelensky. US Defense Secretary Lord Austin said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a pivotal moment and its allies could not lose focus on the ongoing conflict.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine is at a pivotal moment, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said on Wednesday, adding the United States and its allies could not lose focus on the 3-month-long conflict as the U.S. pledged $1 billion more in weapons to Kyiv.
We must continue to rise to meet this challenge. Ukraine's soldiers and citizens are doing just that. And they are defending their homeland with resolve, grit, and ingenuity. And they've inspired us all, and they need our help.
Austin spoke in Brussels at a meeting of dozens of defense ministers working to coordinate aid to Ukraine, where several countries pledged more military assistance. The White House announced around $1 billion worth of new weapons for Ukraine on Wednesday, including coastal defense systems and ammunition for artillery and advanced rocket systems.
It includes guided MLRS munitions, 18 more M777 howitzers, and the tactical vehicles to tow them, and 36,000 rounds of 155 millimeter ammunition.
Russia on Wednesday accused Western countries of fighting a proxy war with Russia, saying the blood of Ukrainian civilians was on the hands of Western countries supplying weapons. Ukraine is pressing the United States and other allies for speedy deliveries of weapons as it fights Russian forces in the eastern Donbas region. The battle for the eastern industrial city of Severodonetsk is now the biggest fight in Ukraine, as the conflict has shifted into a punishing war of attrition. Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, told reporters that about 3/4 of Severodonetsk was under Russian control, but Ukrainians were fighting fiercely for the city.
The numbers clearly favor the Russians. In terms of artillery, they do outnumber, they outgun and outrange. You've heard that many, many times. And they do have enough forces, but the Russians have run into a lot of problems. They've got command and control issues, logistics issues, they've got morale issues, leadership issues, and a wide variety of other issues. So the Ukrainians are fighting a heroic fight.
Kyiv has said it was losing 100 to 200 soldiers each day, with hundreds more wounded. In an overnight address, President Volodymyr Zelensky described the battle for the Donbas industrial heartland as one of the most brutal in European history.
The war in Ukraine is nearing its 5th month, and the situation in eastern Ukraine continues to worsen, with an increase in shelling and war casualties. Ambulance teams in the Donbas region have come to the rescue of those frontline soldiers.
Amid the continued shelling and fighting in eastern Ukraine, ambulance teams are having a tough time in rescuing the wounded. Not only are these medics treating the injured soldiers, they also brave the bombardments to pick up the injured soldiers. Much of the Donbas region has been abandoned after months of shelling and fighting, so much so that these medics have to hide under trees to avoid being detected by Russian drones.
Ні, абсолютно ні. Завжди бомблять, десь поряд. Їм немає різниці, по чому стріляти. В цьому ми впевнені. Абсолютно.
The situation is so dire that on a daily basis there are more than 100 military deaths. On an average, 500 frontline fighters are injured daily. Many of these injuries are life-threatening and involve an urgent need for amputation.
When we have a leg amputation or hand amputation or big injury of torso, blood on the floor, blood on the wall, all my clothes on blood. I can show you all my clothes now. That's like a First World War, when soldiers staying on the positions and just waiting of artillery.
The medics also say that most of these severe wounds are from artillery fire, reminiscent of the First World War. While medical services are also supposed to be protected, that is not always the case in the ongoing war in Ukraine. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The Federal Police of Brazil claim to have found human remains during their search after a suspect confessed to killing a missing British journalist and his aide in the Amazon rainforest.
Police in Brazil say a suspect has confessed to the killing of journalist Dom Phillips and indigenous expert Bruno Pereira. Investigators said Wednesday the suspect led police to a remote burial site where they unearthed human remains, marking a grim conclusion to a case that has sparked protests domestically and raised global alarm. Detective Eduardo Fontes told a news conference the suspect is a fisherman who had clashed with Pereira over his efforts to combat illegal fishing in indigenous territory. He added that another suspect in custody has denied any role in the murder, despite incriminating evidence, which officials are continuing to uncover at the site.
Excavations have been carried out at the site and continue to be carried out. From now on, we move on to a new stage, the phase of identifying these human remains.
Pereira was a former head of isolated and recently contacted tribes at a Brazilian Indigenous Affairs agency, and Phillips, a British freelance reporter who has written for The Guardian and The Washington Post, was doing research with Pereira for a book. They were working in a remote jungle area in the Amazon rainforest near the border with Colombia and Peru when they went missing. The region, also known as the Javari Valley, is home to the world's largest number of uncontacted indigenous people and has been invaded by illegal fishermen, hunters, loggers, miners, and drug traffickers. Witnesses say Pereira had received threats from one of the suspects before. They also say the suspects were seen meeting in the area just moments after Phillips and Pereira passed by on June 5th. Public defenders representing the two suspects could not immediately be reached for comment. Police are investigating a third person's involvement, and further arrests are possible. Meanwhile, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who has come under growing pressure to find Phillips and Pereira and previously faced questioning by Phillips himself, suggested Wednesday the journalist had made enemies by writing about environmental issues.
Authorities in Saudi Arabia are conducting raids in the country. Shops in the national capital, Riyadh, were raided by officials where they seized rainbow-coloured toys and articles of clothing. The recent raids targeted items which were manufactured for children. Items like rainbow-coloured bows, skirts, hats and pencil cases were seized. Authorities in the country claim that all the seized items contradicted the Islamic faith and public morals, adding that the rainbow-coloured items could be used by some to promote homosexuality. The number of establishments raided and items seized by officials has not yet been declared. An official who was a part of the raid said the colours send a poisoned message to children. Homosexuality is outlawed in the kingdom. These raids are the latest crackdown by the authorities on content that may promote the rights of LGBTQ+ communities. Earlier, authorities had restricted and banned movies which depicted or even referred to homosexuality. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, had lifted a decade-long ban on all cinemas in 2017 as part of a series of social reforms led by the Crown Prince. But the latest raids show that the country has a long way to go to ensure equal rights for all communities. The Spanish La Liga have stepped up their attack on cash-rich clubs, Paris Saint-Germain and Manchester City. The league claims that the two clubs have continuously breached financial fair play rules and have lodged a formal complaint with Uefa. The confirmation of the complaint comes after PSG and Man City either retained or signed players Spanish champions Real Madrid wanted to buy. Manchester City signed Norwegian sensation Erling Haaland from Borussia Dortmund for $62 million, while Kylian Mbappe snubbed Real Madrid and opted to stay at PSG. It was reported that he received $156 million as a bonus to remain with the club. La Liga had already filed a complaint against Manchester City in April, while the one against PSG was made earlier this week. The intervention on the part of the Spanish top-flight club continues a growing civil war within European football. In a statement, La Liga launched a full-fledged attack on both clubs and claimed that they were run by the state money of UAE and Qatar. I quote, "La Liga considers that these practices alter the ecosystem and the sustainability of football, harm all European clubs and leagues and only serve to artificially inflate the market with money not generated in football itself." La Liga understands that the irregular financing of these clubs is carried out either through direct injections of money or through sponsorship and other contracts that do not correspond to market conditions or make economic sense. The statement also added that those complaints could possibly be broadened with the addition of new information, with law firms hired in France and Switzerland to take formal action. Neither City nor PSG have commented on the latest allegations, but they vigorously defended themselves against La Liga's previous claims. Prince William showed off his football skills on Wednesday when he joined the women's national team at their training session at St George's Park. The Duke of Cambridge even scored a perfect goal. We leave you with these visuals. That's all we have. Stay tuned to WION for all the latest global updates.
Have a go. It is always come in unprepared shoes. It's really important. Good, I got this.
Yeah. Just hold the shirts a bit higher. Thank you.
Yeah, it will look like they've signed for the England team now.
There are many other. This is right, Arab.